October 11th, 1943, 18,000 feet above the Solomon Sea, nearing Rabaul. The air is thin, sharp, and achingly clear. Below, the ocean is a vast, wrinkled sheet of sapphire. Inside the cockpit of his A6M3 Model 22-0, Flight Petty Officer First Class Kenji Tanaka feels a familiar fusion of man and machine. The Sake engine hums a perfect, reassuring rhythm through the light airframe. His gloved hands rest on the controls with the casual intimacy of a craftsman holding his favorite tools. The Zero is an extension of his own will, a creature of sublime grace and lethal purpose. For 2 years, this machine has been the undisputed master of the Pacific sky. Tanaka and his comrades in the 204th Kokutai know this not as propaganda, but as a simple, proven fact. They have danced around the lumbering American Wildcats and Airacobras, their 20mm cannons turning clumsy opponents into blossoming flowers of fire and black smoke. A crackle in his headset. His wingman, Sub-Lieutenant Ito, his voice tight with excitement. "Tanaka-san, 9 o'clock high, bogeys." Tanaka's head snaps around. His eyes, trained to see specks at impossible distances, find them. Not bombers, fighters. But they are unlike anything he has seen before. They are enormous, monstrously so. Their radial engines are encased in huge circular cowlings, their fuselages thick and barrel-chested, their wings broad and blunt. They look less like birds of prey and more like flying fists. He counts 8 of them, holding a disciplined formation, escorting a flight of B-24 Liberators. The Americans are pushing closer to the fortress of Rabaul than ever before, a foolish arrogance. Ito's voice comes again, laced with disbelief and a hint of derision. What are they? They look like water barrels with wings. Tanaka keys his own microphone, a grim smile touching his lips. They are targets, Ito, nothing more. He signals the rest of his flight. 4 zeros against 8 of these new behemoths. The odds feel comfortably in their favor. The plan is simple, classic. They will use their superior climb rate to get above the Americans, then dive through their formation, breaking it apart. Once the brawl begins, their agility will be decisive. No American fighter can turn with a zero. It is the first rule of aerial combat in the Pacific. As they climb, the American fighters react, turning to meet them. Tanaka gets a better look. They are brutish, ugly. He can almost feel their weight, the sheer inertia they must carry through the air. He imagines the American pilot, a fat farmer from a place called Ohio or Texas, wrestling with his heavy controls. The two formations merge. Tanaka picks his target, the last plane in the American element. He rolls his Zero onto its side, the horizon spinning, and pulls back on the stick. The fighter responds instantly, carving a tight, vicious arc that the big American plane cannot hope to match. He is on its tail in seconds. The American pilot seems to panic, trying to dive away, a fatal mistake. The Zero can outdive a Wildcat, but this new machine, it accelerates with terrifying speed. It plunges as if tied to an anchor, the gap between them widening instantly. Tanaka stares, astonished. The thing doesn't just dive, it falls from the sky like a stone. He breaks off, realizing he cannot catch it, and seeks another target. He finds one turning, and this time the engagement is on his terms. He slides onto the tail of the big fighter, the crosshairs of his gun sight settling perfectly on the broad fuselage. He squeezes the firing stud. The reassuring chatter of his 7.7mm machine guns fills the cockpit, joined by the deeper, slower thud of his 20mm cannons. Tracers stream out, stitching a line of bright sparks across the enemy's wing and tail. Smoke appears, a hit, a kill. But the American fighter does not die. It does not spiral down in flames. It shudders, the smoke thickens, but it keeps flying. It absorbs the punishment as if its skin were made of solid steel. Tanaka keeps firing, pouring cannon shells and bullets into it, enough to disintegrate 3 Wildcats. Still, it flies on, a wounded but defiant beast. He can see the American pilot looking back at him, a fleeting glimpse of a helmet inside a spacious, armored cockpit. There is no panic in that posture. Ito's voice screams over the radio, a sound of pure shock. "They are too strong. My shells do nothing." Ito Jiro flashes past, trailing a thin line of black smoke. One of the big fighters is on his tail, not turning, but in a shallow, controlled dive. Its nose spitting fire from what looks like a dozen guns. 8 streams of 50 caliber tracers, thick as ropes, reach out and tear Ito's delicate Zero to pieces. The canopy shatters, the tail assembly disintegrates, and the wing folds like paper. It is over in less than 2 seconds. An execution, not a dogfight. Tanaka feels a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He breaks off, diving hard. The remaining Zeros scatter. They have lost 2. The Americans have lost none. As he streaks for the safety of Rabal's airspace, he risks a look back. The big fighters are not pursuing with any real vigor. They are regrouping, turning back toward their home base, their mission to protect the bombers complete. Their stubby shapes recede, leaving Tanaka with a feeling he has not known since the war began. It is not fear. It is a profound, unsettling confusion. Back at the airfield, the pilots will gather and talk. They will call the new fighter the Jug, or the Butasan, the pig. They will laugh about its clumsiness, its inability to turn. They will convince themselves it is just another failed American design. But Kendi Tanaka will not laugh. He has seen what it can absorb. He has seen how it dives. And he knows with a certainty that chills his soul that the sky is no longer theirs alone. November 5th, 1943. A dirt and steel Marston mat runway at WWII, New Guinea. The air is a physical weight, thick with the smell of churned mud, rotting vegetation, and high-octane aviation fuel. Captain Frank Cresswell of the 348th Fighter Group pulls off his sweat-soaked helmet and runs a hand through his matted hair. The roar of Pratt & Whitney R2800 engines is a constant, deafening thunder that vibrates in his bones. He watches the ground crew swarm over his P-47 Thunderbolt, number 27, the Iron Duke. They patch a constellation of small holes in the tail and right wing, souvenirs from his latest encounter with the 204th Kokutai. The holes are from 7.7mm rounds. They feel more like insect bites than bullet holes. One of the crew chiefs, a grizzled sergeant named Mac, pats the thick fuselage. "She took a few more today, Captain. Barely noticed, I bet." Frank nods, but doesn't smile. He had noticed. He had felt the impacts. A series of dull thuds that were terrifyingly loud inside the cockpit. But Mac was right. The Jug hadn't flinched. It was a 7-ton bank vault with wings. That was its gift and its curse. Flying the Thunderbolt in the Pacific felt like bringing a broadsword to a rapier fight. In the briefing rooms, the lectures were endless, hammered into their skulls by commanders like Colonel Neil Kirby. You are not a Zero. You will not fight like a Zero. You will not turn with a Zero. If you try, you will die. Is that clear? It was brutally clear. The first time Frank had tried to follow a Zero into a climbing turn, the nimble Japanese fighter had seemed to hang suspended in the air before flipping over and appearing on his tail, cannons blazing. He had only survived by ramming the throttle forward and diving until his ears bled. The Zero unable to match the P-47's sheer velocity in a descent. Since then, he'd obeyed the new gospel. Energy fighting. Boom and zoom. Use your altitude. Use your speed. Use your firepower. Never, ever get slow. Today, he had followed the rules perfectly. They had been escorting B-25 Mitchells on a strike against Japanese barges near Wewak. The Zeros came down from the sun, as they always did, looking like silver wasps. Frank's flight, holding the high-altitude top cover, had been waiting. He'd picked his target, a Zero fixated on a lower-flying Thunderbolt, and nosed the Iron Duke over. This is the moment that separates the P-47 from every other aircraft in the sky. You don't just dive, you plummet. The altimeter unwinds like a broken clock. 30,000 feet, 25,000 feet. The roar of the double wasp deepens into a visceral, gut-wrenching scream. The air rushing past the canopy sounds like a hurricane trying to tear the glass away. The controls grow heavy, resistant, as if you're trying to move them through wet concrete. The plane shakes, a violent, bone-jarring shudder that threatens to tear the wings from the fuselage. You are no longer flying. You are a guided projectile, a 15,000-pound bullet aimed at the Earth. Through the gun sight, the Zero grew from a speck to a perfectly framed target in seconds. Frank could see the pilot's head, the red Hinomaru on the wings. He was closing at over 500 miles per hour. There was no time for finesse, no room for error. His thumb found the trigger on the control stick. He pressed it. The Thunderbolt erupts. The simultaneous firing of 8 50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns is not a sound, it is a physical event. It is a deafening, metallic roar that consumes the cockpit. The smell of cordite instantly sharp and acrid. The entire airframe vibrates with the force of it. A torrent of armor-piercing, incendiary tracers pours from the wings, a solid stream of destruction that converges on the target a few hundred yards ahead. The effect on the delicate, unarmored Zero was catastrophic. Frank saw pieces of the Japanese fighter simply fly off, the rudder, a section of the wing, the canopy. Then a bright orange flash as the fuel tank ignited. The Zero vanished in a roiling ball of fire and black smoke, its pieces tumbling down toward the dense green canopy of the jungle below. The entire attack, from the start of the dive to the kill, had lasted less than 30 seconds. He pulled back on the stick with both hands, muscles straining to bring the nose of the heavy fighter up. The G-force crushed him into his seat, the world turning gray at the edges of his vision. He leveled out, gulping for air, his heart hammering against his ribs. It was a clean kill, a perfect execution of the doctrine. But as his flight regrouped, the familiar frustration returned. The surviving Zeros, broken and scattered, were already streaking for home, flying low over the jungle canopy. They were heading back toward their bases around WWII, places where the Thunderbolts could not follow. He looked at his fuel gauge. It was already nudging toward the halfway point. The P-47 was a thirsty beast. They had enough fuel to get back to WWII, with a little to spare for emergencies, but that was it. They had won the engagement, but the enemy had escaped. The Zeros could retreat, rearm, refuel, and rise to fight another day, safe in their sanctuary. Frank banked the Iron Duke eastward, the setting sun glinting off its unpainted aluminum skin. He and his squadron were kings of the sky, but only within a few hundred miles of their own airskip. Beyond that invisible line, the Pacific still belonged to the Zero. They were winning battles, but the enemy held the board. For now, the laughter of the Zero pilots might be quieter, more nervous, but it had not been silenced. Not yet. January 24, 1944. Sidor Airfield, New Guinea. The war in New Guinea is fought against two enemies, the Japanese and the island itself. At Sidor, a newly captured strip of land hacked from the jungle's edge, the second enemy is relentless. The humidity is a suffocating blanket, making every breath a conscious effort. Metal tools left in the sun become hot enough to brand skin. Sweat drips from the chins of mechanics working in the open, staining their overalls dark. The ever-present mud, a mixture of volcanic soil and monsoon rain, seems to have a magnetic attraction to engines, landing gear, and boots. It is a miserable, exhausting, and vital piece of real estate, and it is here that the nature of the air war is about to be completely rewritten. Lined up along the pierced steel planking are new arrivals, fighters that look subtly but critically different from the ones that flew missions just weeks before. These are the P-47D 20RA models, the bubble tops. Gone is the old Razorback fuselage with its poor rear visibility. In its place is a sleek, clear-blown teardrop canopy offering a panoramic 360-degree view of the sky. But the most important change is not what you can see, it's what you can't. Underneath the wings and the fuselage are new hardpoints, shackles designed for one purpose: to carry fuel. Sergeant Mack clambers down from the wing of Captain Frank Cresswell's new aircraft, wiping grease and sweat from his face with the back of his hand. He gestures a long 200-gallon ferry tank lying on the grass nearby, a dull aluminum cylinder shaped like a flattened bomb. "Thing's a monster, Captain," he yells over the engine tests down the line. "Gives you another couple hours of flying time, but she'll fly like a pregnant cow until you pickle it off." Frank circles the tank, running a hand over its smooth surface. 200 gallons. That was more than the entire internal fuel capacity of a Japanese Zero. With 2 of these under the wings and a belly tank, a Thunderbolt could carry an astonishing amount of fuel. The implications are staggering, and they are the subject of every conversation in the ready tents and makeshift officers' clubs. The invisible leash that has kept them tied to their home bases is about to be cut. Inside the briefing tent, the air is thick with the smell of canvas, sweat, and cigarette smoke. A large map of New Guinea is pinned to a board, its surface dotted with red markers indicating known Japanese airfields: Wewak, Hollandia, Taji. These are the hornets' nests, the sanctuaries from which the Zeros have operated with impunity. Until now, they have been far beyond the effective combat radius of any American fighter. Colonel Neil Kirby stands before the assembled pilots of the 348th Fighter Group. He is not a large man, but he possesses an intensity that seems to charge the air around him. He taps the map, his finger landing squarely on Hollandia, over 400 miles away. "Gentlemen," he begins, his voice calm but hard as iron. "For months, we have waited for them to come to us. We have fought them over our territory, on our terms. That period of the war is over. From this moment on, we are taking the war to them." A low murmur runs through the room. 400 miles. That's an 800-mile round trip, not including time for combat. It's a mission that would have been considered suicidal just a month ago. Kirby continues, his eyes scanning the faces of his men. "You will take off with full internal fuel and 3 drop tanks. You will cruise at a lean mixture, conserving every drop. Your mission is a fighter sweep. You will arrive over Hollandia, and you will achieve total air supremacy. You will shoot down anything that flies. When your external tanks are dry, you will drop them and engage. The P-47 has the range now. The question is, do you have the endurance?" Frank Cresswell looks at the map, tracing the long blue line of their proposed flight path. It stretches over hundreds of miles of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth: towering mountain ranges veiled in cloud, and vast, featureless swaths of triple canopy jungle. If an engine failed, if you were shot down, there would be no rescue. The jungle would swallow you whole. It was a one-way ticket if anything went wrong. The sheer audacity of the plan is breathtaking. They are no longer just bomber escorts or defensive interceptors. They are becoming hunters, predators with a continental reach. He feels a mix of cold apprehension and a sharp, exhilarating thrill. This is what they have all been waiting for. The frustration of watching the Zeros run for home, the anger of fighting with one hand tied behind their back, it's all about to end. The Jug, the clumsy, overweight, indestructible brawler, has been given long legs. It has been transformed from a guardian into an avenger. As the briefing ends and the pilots file out into the blinding tropical sun, the roar of the engines seems to hold a new promise. It is the sound of a closing trap. The days of safety for the Zero pilots are numbered. They just don't know it yet. March 5th, 1944. 22,000 feet over the Sepik River, New Guinea. The sun is a merciless white disk in a pale, washed-out sky. For nearly 2 hours, Captain Frank Cresswell has seen nothing but the infinite green carpet of the jungle below and the metallic shimmer of the other 16 P-47s in his squadron. The Iron Duke feels sluggish, weighed down by the hundreds of gallons of fuel hanging from its belly and wings. The R-2800 engine has been throttled back to a steady, fuel-sipping drone, a sound that feels unnervingly quiet compared to its usual combat roar. Inside the cockpit, the air is hot and stale. Frank shifts in his seat, fighting the encroaching numbness in his legs and the hypnotic effect of the endless green. They are deep in enemy territory now, far beyond any reasonable hope of rescue. The needle on his primary fuel gauge hasn't even begun to move yet. They are still running on the external tanks. The sheer distance they have covered is a new, unsettling reality. Meanwhile, 60 miles to the west, near the Japanese airbase at Taji, Flight Petty Officer Kenji Tanaka is leading a flight of 6 Zeros on a routine patrol. The mood in his flight is relaxed. They are flying over friendly ground, close to home. The big-nosed American fighters rarely ventured this far. The encounters of the past few months have been sharp and brutal, but always brief. The Americans would strike, and then, inevitably, they would retreat, their fuel running low. The Zero pilots have learned to respect the Thunderbolt's dive and its firepower, but they have also learned its weakness. Patience, a quick turn, and a short run for home have always been the answer. A call comes from his rear escort. Bogies, high, 10 o'clock, many of them. Tanaka looks up and to his left. He sees them. A swarm of silver specks glinting in the sun like deadly insects. He recognizes the thick, powerful silhouette instantly. Thunderbolts. But what are they doing here? This far west? It makes no sense. They must be at the absolute limit of their range, running on fumes. He feels a surge of predatory confidence. They have caught the Americans at their most vulnerable. This is Tanaka. All units, climb to engage. We will bleed their fuel and then finish them. Do not follow them in a dive. Let them come to us. His Zeros, light and nimble, begin to claw for altitude. But the Thunderbolts are not descending to engage. They are holding their position, circling like patient vultures, waiting. Frank Cresswell watches the Zeros rising to meet them. From his vantage point, they look like small, desperate fish swimming up from the depths. His voice is calm and steady in the headset. All right, Duke Flight, this is it. They're taking the bait. Wait for my signal. Let them get a little closer. The Japanese pilots, eager for a fight, push their engines to the maximum. They are closing the distance, preparing to slash through the American formation. Tanaka selects his target, the lead American plane. Frank waits until the Zeros are just within firing range. Okay, boys, pickle the tanks, now. High above the jungle, 17 aluminum belly tanks drop away from the Thunderbolts in near-perfect unison. Relieved of the weight and drag, the P-47 seem to leap forward, suddenly alive and agile. Frank rolls the Iron Duke onto its wing and plunges downward. The rest of the squadron follows. It is the classic boom and zoom, but this time it is happening in a place the Zeros thought was their exclusive domain. The screaming descent is terrifyingly familiar. Tanaka watches the lead Thunderbolt swell in his windscreen at an impossible speed. He brakes hard, the G-force stapling him to his seat. The torrent of 50 caliber rounds passes just behind his tail. But as he reverses his turn to engage, he sees the Thunderbolt is not running. It is using its immense speed to pull up into a massive climbing loop, converting velocity back into altitude, ready for another devastating pass. The sky erupts into a chaotic melee of diving Thunderbolts and turning Zeros. The American pilots are disciplined, refusing to be drawn into low-speed dogfights. They dive, fire, and climb, a relentless, repeating cycle of violence. 2 Zeros are blown apart in the first pass. The Japanese pilots are bewildered. The Americans are fighting with an aggression they have never seen this far from the coast. Tanaka knows he cannot win this fight. His only option is the one that has always worked. All units, disengage, retreat to Taji, scatter. He pushes the nose of his Zero down and firewalls the throttle, streaking for home at treetop level. The other surviving Zeros do the same. This is the moment the Americans should break off, their fuel low, their objective complete. He glances back, expecting to see them regrouping and turning east. They are still there, 3 of them. They are right behind him, hugging the contours of the jungle, their huge radial engines chewing up the distance. He stares in horror. They are not breaking off. They are not low on fuel. He feels a sudden, profound wave of terror, a cold dread that eclipses anything he has ever felt in combat. There is no escape. The sanctuary is no longer safe. His desperate flight becomes a running gun battle. He jinks left and right, trying to throw off their aim, but the Thunderbolts are implacable. Tracers flash past his canopy. He can hear the thud of heavy-caliber rounds hitting his airframe. An alarm light flashes on his instrument panel. Oil pressure is dropping. He risks another look back. One of his wingmen, trying a desperate climbing turn, is met by a wall of fire from a P-47 and simply evaporates. The chase continues for 30 miles, an eternity. The runways of Taji are almost in sight. Safety is just moments away. But it is a safety that will never come. Kenji Tanaka's world is filled with the deafening roar of a P-47 passing just feet above his canopy, followed by the catastrophic sound of his own engine tearing itself apart. The sky is gone, replaced by a spinning, terrifying blur of green and brown. March 5, 1944. The smoldering wreckage of Taji Airfield. From the edge of the jungle, the few Japanese ground crew and pilots who survived the attack watch the sky. The American Thunderbolts, their work done, are forming up. They are not racing for home. They are making a final, arrogant pass over the airfield, their wings waggling in a gesture of contemptuous victory. They had not just shot down the patrol, they had followed the survivors all the way back to their lair and strafed the flight line, turning parked aircraft and fuel drums into pillars of fire. They had lingered, circling with impunity, as if to prove they had all the time and all the fuel in the world. Then, as one, they turned east, and their shapes slowly dissolved into the afternoon haze. A profound, deathly silence settled over the field, broken only by the crackle of burning fuel and the cries of the wounded. The myth of sanctuary was shattered. The laughter that had once echoed in the ready rooms, the casual dismissal of the fat American jug, had been permanently silenced. It was replaced by a quiet, gnawing dread. The Zero, a marvel of lightweight engineering, had been designed for short-range, decisive dogfights near its own bases. Its pilots were trained to believe that if things went wrong, home was just a short flight away. That fundamental pillar of their tactical doctrine had been kicked out from under them. Now there was nowhere to run. The enemy could reach them anywhere, anytime. A young pilot, his face smudged with soot and his arm in a makeshift sling, stares at the empty sky. He had managed to land his damaged Zero just as the strafing run began. He looks over at the twisted, burning frame of what was once Kenji Tanaka's aircraft. Tanaka, one of their best, an ace with more than a dozen victories, had been hunted down and slaughtered like an animal miles from the initial point of engagement. The shock was not in the defeat, but in its nature. It was not a battle, it was an extermination. The P-47 hadn't just won, it had changed the very geography of the war. Every mile of jungle, every stretch of open sea between them and the Americans had once been a buffer. Now it was nothing more than a hunting ground for the Thunderbolts. Miles to the east, Frank Cresswell eases back on the throttle, settling in for the long flight home. The Iron Duke is flying light and clean now, its external tanks long gone. Below, the jungle scrolls past, immense and indifferent. His radio is quiet, the post-combat chatter having died down. There is only the steady hum of the R-2800, a sound of absolute reliability. He glances at his fuel gauge. He still has plenty, more than enough to get back to Sidor with a comfortable reserve. The mission had been a spectacular success. They had achieved complete surprise and devastating results. But as he flies, a deeper understanding of what they have accomplished settles in. This was more than just a successful raid. It was a fundamental shift in power. You could feel it in the way the Japanese pilots had panicked, in their desperate, futile dash for a home that was no longer safe. You could see it in the burning hulks on their own airfield. For the first time, Frank felt not like a soldier fighting a battle, but like a predator who had finally learned the full extent of his reach. The Thunderbolt was never the most graceful fighter. It couldn't outturn a Zero, and it couldn't outclimb it from a standing start. But today, none of that had mattered. What mattered was the Pratt & Whitney engine that could run for hours on end without complaint. What mattered was the rugged airframe that could absorb punishment and keep flying. And most of all, what mattered were the long, ugly drop tanks that allowed them to cross hundreds of miles of hostile territory and arrive with enough fuel to dictate the turns of the fight. The P-47's greatest weapon was not its 850 caliber guns, nor its incredible diving speed. Its greatest weapon was the unyielding mechanical persistence that allowed it to go anywhere, to hunt anyone, and to deny its enemy the one thing every soldier needs to survive: a place to hide. As the sun begins to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows from the towering clouds, Frank looks out at the other P-47s holding formation with him. They are no longer just fighters. They are the physical embodiment of America's industrial might, long-range instruments of attrition. They are grinding the enemy's air force down, not just in the air, but in the air, on the ground, and in the minds of its pilots. The arrogant laughter of the Zero Aces was now a distant echo. In its place was the steady, relentless drone of the Thunderbolt's engine. A sound that promised there would be no more games of tag, no more clever escapes. There would only be the long, unforgiving pursuit and the final, brutal reckoning.